Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
After arguing with her mother-in-law, the woman stormed out of the apartment, but once in the elevator, she realized she had forgotten to change her shoes. She quietly crept back, only to accidentally overhear a conversation between her husband and his mother. There was no time to hesitate. Know your worth. That's what her mother always said, and Valeria agreed wholeheartedly. Tall, elegant, with a light, graceful walk, she drew attention and enchanted everyone around her. Valeria made no secret of using this to her advantage and always got what she wanted, be it a new toy as a child or a gift from an enamored boy in her teenage years. There was never a shortage of boys eager to carry her backpack home from school or help her with her exams in university. Still, she was clever enough never to flaunt her utilitarian approach to men. Instead, she gracefully accepted their courtship. Valeria came from a very modest family, but that didn't make her demands any smaller, on the contrary. She knew she wouldn't get a strong financial start in life from her parents, so she planned ahead. Valeria was certain she would only marry a successful man who was firmly on his feet, no counting pesos or begging for trivial things later. Men who didn't have a decent income simply didn't interest her. That doesn't sound right. You talk like you're picking out a shovel at a hardware store, not a man you love, her friend Patricia once told her. Valeria simply gave a spoiled little shrug. What did Patricia know? She was chubby, not particularly pretty, smart, yes, but who cared about that anymore? Patricia had easily gotten into a promising university program, while Valeria had to settle for whatever accepted her. A woman's purpose isn't to slave away from 8 to 5, she would lecture Patricia. A woman's job is to marry well. After that, she can enjoy the rewards. And what exactly do you bring to the table? Patricia asked, adjusting her glasses and looking straight at her friend. What do you offer a man that makes him want to carry you through life? Beauty, intelligence, social grace, the ability, and desire to inspire a man to greatness. Valeria began counting on her slender fingers. Behind every great man in history, there was a woman. Patricia seriously doubted her friend could name even a few such great men, but she nodded for the sake of peace. They were like two poles of a magnet, opposites that somehow stuck together. Valeria stayed true to herself until the age of 26. She had gone through countless suitors, received marriage proposals regularly, but always brushed them off. And what can he offer me? She'd confide in her mother or the ever-loyal Patricia. No home of his own, just a mortgage and a dream of joint ownership. Why do I need that? So he can count every peso and make me feel guilty about spending it. I wasn't found in a dumpster, you know. But what's wrong with a mortgage? Patricia would sigh. At least you'd have something of your own. I think it's a great option. And the guy's sweet, caring, he adores you. He looks at you like you're a masterpiece in a museum. Plenty of men look at me like I'm a masterpiece. But tightening our belts while he slaves away at some job to pay off a mortgage? That's not for me. A real man should bring his woman to his cave. That's how it's been since the mammoth days, mind you. And if he truly loves me, I'll get a place of my own without any mortgage. Her mother completely supported this attitude, especially since Valeria really had turned out quite well. The woman herself had come from the provinces and only married Valeria's father to stay in the capital. She didn't want to go back to her small town. Valeria's father was a quiet, modest man who never said a word against his dominant wife and probably didn't even want to. They raised their only daughter like a princess, and her mother was proud of the result. Our girl won't sell herself cheap, she'd say. She won't trade her youth and beauty for empty words. A man's true value is in his actions. Let her find someone who's not only good-looking and loving but has something solid behind him. A dependable man. A good one. Valeria didn't meet Carlos by chance. Right after university, she started working for a logistics company, and among the clients, her trained eye quickly spotted Carlos. He was fairly young but already head of the logistics department at a major firm. Valeria's heart skipped a beat. Though he didn't meet every standard she'd set for herself, she decided this handsome dark-haired man would be hers. It wasn't hard for a goal-oriented girl like her to create a work-related reason to talk to him. She prepared meticulously for the conversation, and Carlos was impressed enough with her professionalism to even mention her to his superiors. Then fate lent her a hand. During their next meeting, discussing loading processes, a sudden downpour began, a sheer curtain of rain slashing from the sky. "Well, great," Valeria exclaimed in faux despair. "How am I supposed to get home now? Buses will be packed, and the subway too. Poor me. And I'm in sandals and a light jacket, of course." "I'll drive you," Carlos offered gallantly, thus beginning their informal outings. And from there, according to Valeria's usual algorithm, they grew closer and closer. She trusted her instincts. Carlos turned out to be someone she genuinely enjoyed being around. He shared openly about himself, though there wasn't that much to tell. His father had passed away 6 years earlier, leaving him and his mother a spacious 4-bedroom apartment. "Good thing I had a scholarship, so I didn't have to drop out after Dad died," he said calmly. "It was rough, scary even. But I got used to it. My mom took it hard. They were so in love. I thought I might lose her too." "Has she recovered?" Valeria asked, though her thoughts were elsewhere. 6 years, surely enough time to move on. "Yeah, she has," Carlos smiled softly. "She even bought a little country house about 30 kilometers from the city. Spends half the year there, from spring to fall. You should see it. A gorgeous rose garden, greenhouses, a grapevine-covered arch, all built by her own hands. Can you believe it?" Valeria didn't care for the mom talk but acted as interested as she could. It was obvious Carlos adored his mother, and Valeria sensed she'd have to love, or convincingly fake love, for his mother too, if she wanted to land Carlos. So she practically clapped her hands with delight and begged him to take her to meet his mom that weekend. "My relatives in the provinces never had anything like that," she said, lowering her eyes. "There, everything's practical, every patch of land is for vegetables or fruit. Try planting a flower and you'll get scolded. But I always dreamed of having a garden like in a fairy tale, roses here, nasturtiums there, dahlias over there." "Then you'll definitely get along with my mom," Carlos said confidently. "She was a biology teacher her whole life, so she approaches everything scientifically. She'll show you everything and maybe even give you a little plot to plant something yourself." "I can't wait for Saturday," Valeria whispered, resting her delicate hand on his elbow. Carlos just smiled. He was sure he had finally found the woman with whom he could build a solid family. He hadn't told anyone, but not long before meeting Valeria, his previous relationship had ended in heartbreak. Catalina, the woman he'd adored, had run off with his former best friend. In Valeria's arms, he was finally coming back to life. Maria Consuelo, Carlos's mother, welcomed the young couple with a warm smile and a table full of delicacies. "I canned these tomatoes myself," she said, placing dish after dish on the table. "And these pickles, homegrown cucumbers, spiced with my own blend of herbs. They're unbelievably delicious." Valeria replied sincerely. She truly enjoyed the warm reception. Other men had introduced her to their mothers too, but those women always looked down their noses at her. Here, Maria Consuelo treated her like family. After lunch, Carlos went to help with some chores outside, and Valeria and Maria Consuelo wandered off into the flower garden. Valeria couldn't stop marveling, and, for once, it was genuine. "I bred this variety myself," said Maria Consuelo, gesturing proudly toward the flower bed. "I'm no great horticulturist, of course, but I put a lot of effort into it. Look what I managed to create. I hope I can continue working on it, maybe even make it more frost-resistant, so it blooms at least until the end of November." Valeria crouched down and inhaled the flower's scent. "You're a real magician," she said, turning to Maria Consuelo. "I feel like if you stuck a dry stick in the ground, it would bloom and bear fruit." "Oh, don't say such things, girl," the woman waved her hand, embarrassed but clearly pleased. "But I appreciate it, really. You're a lovely girl, bright and kind. I'm glad Carlos brought you." Maria Consuelo was aware of her son's failed past relationship, but she had no intention of telling Valeria about it. She simply rejoiced, in a motherly way, that her grown child had finally found happiness. Carlos didn't earn nearly as much as Valeria had once dreamed of, but he was determined, talented, driven, and had a promising future. After weighing all the pros and cons, Valeria had decided he was the perfect candidate for her. He's gentle, kind, affectionate, she listed to her friend Patricia, and he's so attentive. Can you imagine? No man remembers anniversaries, our first kiss, the day we met, yet he finds a reason to celebrate me almost every month. You're lucky, Valeria, sighed Patricia. Though from Valeria's perspective, there was no reason for Patricia to envy her. She had a boyfriend too, not as ambitious, maybe, but clearly loving. Valeria wasn't in a rush to make things official with Carlos. She was perfectly content with him showering her with love and attention, figuratively and literally. But putting a ring on it and calling Carlos her husband felt like a very serious commitment, one that would cut off her ability to slip away if needed. She loved him as much as she was capable of loving someone, but she always kept in mind that life is unpredictable, and a woman should always secure her position. 6 months later, Patricia got married. Her husband worked in a research institute in a modest position, so they couldn't afford a grand celebration. They registered their marriage quietly, drove around the city in a rented car, had dinner at a small cafe, and then went their separate ways. That made Valeria think, for the first time, that maybe it was time to make Carlos happy. It's such a shame Patricia didn't throw her bouquet, she told him one evening. I'm sure I would have caught it. Carlos looked at her with his deep brown eyes, framed by long lashes, and asked, Sweetheart, is that your way of hinting that I should be thinking about a proposal? His straightforwardness caught Valeria off guard. On the one hand, any woman who had to ask a man to propose was considered a failure. The proper thing was to be proposed to, spontaneously, and to consider whether the suitor was even worthy. On the other hand, it seemed Carlos was perfectly fine with how things were, and Valeria was being torn by conflicting thoughts. If Patricia could wear a white dress, even a cheap one, why couldn't she have a lavish celebration? After all, she had chosen Carlos for his positive traits. Carlos seemed to read her mind and asked, Are you sure I'm really the prince on the white horse you want to tie your life to? Whoa! That level of directness was new. Instead of answering, Valeria placed her hands on his chest and slowly said, emphasizing every word, Do you ever, even for a second, doubt that you can make me truly happy? Not for a moment, Carlos whispered, before pulling her into a deep, passionate kiss. They didn't talk about it again that day, but a few days later, Carlos took Valeria to a restaurant and proposed to her just the way she had always dreamed, flowers, music, candlelight, and a beautiful gold ring in a velvet box. You really made the right choice, said Valeria's mother proudly. It doesn't matter what a man has, as long as he's willing to spend money and time on you, he's the right one. He's the right one, echoed Valeria, admiring how the ring sparkled on her finger. Valeria wanted a very luxurious wedding. After all, she planned to marry once and for life. Are you sure we really need all of this? Carlos cautiously broached the topic. I mean, I don't think we can afford both the ice sculptures and the fireworks and the extra floral decorations. Are you telling me I'm not worth spending money on? Valeria gave him a hurt look, pouting. I thought you'd do anything to make me happy. My love, is happiness really in ice sculptures and fireworks? Carlos asked, bewildered. Wouldn't it be better to spend that money on a romantic trip instead? Just the two of us, on a warm beach, making memories and taking pictures. Ice sculptures can be in the pictures too, Valeria replied in her same wounded little girl voice. And are you saying we're going to skip a honeymoon? Carlos, it's our honeymoon. You want the honeymoon on top of all this, he said, gesturing at the long list she had compiled. I plan to marry you once, so there will be only one wedding in my life, Valeria replied with parade ground clarity. If we have the chance to make it unforgettable, why shouldn't we? Because I don't have that kind of money, Carlos shrugged. It's just not a sum I can come up with. Valeria kept sulking, clearly signaling that she wanted everything. Carlos shook his head, saying, "You're like a spoiled child." Yet he couldn't bring himself to deny her outright. Burdened by these thoughts, he went to his mother and confessed that he might need to take out a loan. Valeria wanted a lavish wedding and a honeymoon abroad. "Well, no one can forbid living beautifully," Maria Consuelo said dryly. "So what's your plan? You're a young professional, unlikely to get a large loan, and you'd still have to repay it." "Carlos, sweetheart, if Valeria starts making demands like this, it's going to be hard for your family." "But I love her," Carlos said softly. "I think she'll get used to our lifestyle over time, and things will settle. And for a girl, the wedding is like her first ball." "The wedding is like her first ball," Maria Consuelo repeated. Then she got up and went to another room. When she returned, she held a tightly wrapped bundle in her hands. "Here, son. Take a look. I've been saving some money for a rainy day." "Mama, what are you doing?" Carlos shook his head and placed his strong hands over hers. "Please don't even think about giving me your savings. Son, this is the least I can do for you. And honestly, I'm glad to be using my savings for something joyful, your wedding. Take it with a clean heart. Maybe it won't cover everything Valeria wants, but it'll help ease your burden." "Mama, you're the most amazing woman I've ever known," Carlos said, rushing to embrace her tightly. "Just promise me that after the wedding, you'll always remember this," she said, holding him close. How had her tiny little boy grown up so fast? Valeria was overjoyed when she heard that, thanks to her future mother-in-law, they would have a magnificent wedding. "See? I told you that you could do it," she exclaimed, beaming. "You made it happen. Hooray!" "Actually, it was my mom who helped me," Carlos said, a bit embarrassed. "Without her savings, I couldn't have pulled off a wedding and a honeymoon." Honestly, after that confession, Carlos had been expecting some kind of reciprocal gesture. He thought his fiancée would say that her parents also planned to contribute to the wedding, because that would be fair and reasonable. But Valeria didn't mention a word about that. Instead, she cheerfully chirped about the gorgeous hairstyle she had in mind and her determination to find the most experienced makeup artist so she could shine on their big day. Carlos listened to her for a long time, enjoying her tenderness and the sound of her voice, then gently and calmly asked, "Will your parents be helping at all?" He added softly, "If they chipped in even a little, we could set aside something for after the wedding, to furnish our home. I think we'll need that." Valeria gave him such a puzzled look that Carlos was momentarily speechless. What had triggered such a reaction? "What are you saying?" Valeria exhaled with feeling. What could possibly be expected from the bride? It's the groom's duty to support his young wife. And how will he support her if he can't even pay for the wedding? Carlos didn't know what to say to such a naive statement. Of course, he earned well and aimed to earn more, but he had always believed that a marriage meant sharing responsibilities. Valeria had never expressed such expectations before. Still, he decided it wasn't worth picking a fight over something so small. They could talk about their family budget later. For now, there were more pleasant and interesting things to focus on. Carlos pulled his beloved close and began kissing her passionately. The question of housing was resolved gracefully. There were some bumps along the way, but Carlos managed to appeal to Valeria's sense of reason. Naturally, she insisted that a young family should live separately, but Carlos proposed a simpler and more realistic option. "Let's live with my mom for now," he suggested. "We have a big place of 4 rooms. We could shout to each other across the apartment and still not meet all day. Plus, my mom lives in the countryside half the year. She won't be in our way." Living with someone means adapting to their habits. Valeria wrinkled her nose. And that's always hard for young people. Elderly folks are annoyed by everything. You know, Carlos, old age isn't a joy. Of course, everyone deserves respect, but different generations don't usually coexist well under one roof. "Come on, is my mom some old hag?" Carlos asked sincerely. "She's very modern, uses a smartphone and laptop just fine, and doesn't shy away from any kind of tech. I've renovated everything, too, and furnished the apartment nicely. It'll be cozy for all of us. Seeing Carlos's mood, Valeria decided not to argue. She already understood that he and his mother were bound by dozens of invisible threads, not easily broken. Still, she didn't want to share a home with her mother-in-law. She'd recently had an interesting conversation with her own mother on this topic. Her mother advised her sincerely, "Don't argue with Carlitos right now. You know, if he could think for himself, he would have snatched you up and whisked you away somewhere. Few men actually like living next to their mothers. It's probably your future mother-in-law scheming, trying to keep her son under her wing and control everything. She's giving him a fun life. Don't press the issue for now. But once you get pregnant, lay down the law. Either the baby is born in a separate apartment or you're getting an abortion." Valeria loved that idea. After all, who wants to live side by side with their mother-in-law? But she didn't want to confront Carlos directly. She loved him, after all. It would be much better if he made the decision to move out, eager to start a family with her. That would be perfect. She even smiled at the thought Carlos would make a wonderful father. The wedding day was fast approaching, and Maria Consuelo couldn't shake the feeling that sweet little Valeria was showing some aristocratic airs. She clearly saw that Carlos was struggling, but he was doing everything Valeria asked of him, and even saying, "It's okay, we're only getting married once. Let it be the wedding she dreams of. I'm a man, aren't I? It's not that expensive, really." "Valeria told you it's not that expensive?" Maria Consuelo couldn't help asking, though she had tried to stay silent and not make things worse. "If you add it all up, it's not cheap at all, Carlitos. Let's be honest, your darling wants a very fancy wedding. We live once, marry once," Carlos sighed. "Cut your coat according to your cloth," she said sharply. When she saw her son's face fall, she quickly added, "She's a good girl, just like spending money a bit too much. She doesn't earn that much, but always finds a way to spend. Valeria's extravagant, you see? Extravagant." Carlos looked relieved that his mother understood. "But I love her, even like that." "Well, if you love her, then love her," Maria Consuelo said, softening. She realized there was no point trying to talk sense into him. She'll come around eventually. She's still young. Green. Carlos nodded and fell into some silent calculations, while Maria Consuelo left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. She had seen plenty of flirty girls in her life and could practically write a manual on them. And yet, somehow, she hadn't seen through Valeria at first. Then again, she thought, maybe she was being too harsh. In today's world, where everyone sees the glamorous lives of the rich on social media, who doesn't want a fancy wedding? She remembered that she and Miguel had also had an expensive wedding at the time, rented a restaurant, decorated cars with dolls, danced till morning. Maybe she was just turning into that kind of mother-in-law, bitter, picky, stingy. Smiling faintly, Maria Consuelo scolded herself and resolved to stay out of Carlos and Valeria's business. She had enough to do anyway. If the couple was going to live with her, at least she should get the apartment ready so she wouldn't be embarrassed in front of her new daughter-in-law. The wedding celebration was grand. Valeria had no shame posting photos and quick video clips across all her social media. Most of the professional material was still in editing. She had hired such high-end photographers and videographers that they needed a month to finish the work. For now, she made do with snippets. Carlos, clearly, was glowing. Beaming and proud, he led his bride by the hand. Everyone could see, this was happiness. Beside him, Valeria sparkled like polished copper. She was proud of how masterfully she had orchestrated the wedding. Sure, Carlos wasn't the son of an oligarch or a president like she'd once dreamed, but he was young, handsome, ambitious, and madly in love with her. What more could you want? Patricia and her husband were happy for the couple too, though the reserved and thoughtful woman couldn't help wondering how Valeria had ended up with Carlos. She had aimed much higher. Sensing her thoughts, her husband whispered to Patricia, "Your ambitious little friend, she picked someone she could mold. A tough guy would have shut her down quick. But this one? He'll do anything for her. It's obvious." Patricia just nodded. The diagnosis was clear. The only mystery left was, how did Carlos not see it? After the wedding, the couple went on a magnificent honeymoon, one that Valeria had practically wrung out of Carlos. Every time he tried to explain that it would leave them without any emergency funds, she would look at him from under her long bangs with wounded eyes, and he'd just sigh and agree with his princess. When they returned, Maria Consuelo had cleared 2 rooms for them. Valeria sincerely thanked her for making sure they were comfortable. "See? You and my mom get along so well," Carlos said cheerfully. "I can already see it. Soon the 2 of you will be teaming up to scold me for every little mistake." Like any woman, Maria Consuelo was pleased that her efforts were appreciated. She especially lit up when Valeria praised her cooking. "I could never cook this well, finger-licking good," Valeria would exclaim over another beautifully prepared dish. "I'll teach you. It's easy," Maria Consuelo would say, already launching into a step-by-step tutorial. But Valeria didn't want to learn. She kept making excuses, work, fatigue, one thing or another. Fortunately, it was October, and the countryside house season was officially over, so Valeria had no doubt that Maria Consuelo would continue to delight them with her culinary masterpieces for several more months. But then, dark clouds began to gather over the household, although no one noticed it just yet. Carlos watched his young wife fluttering in front of him in a short silk robe with affection and joy. Valeria had recently talked him into buying it, and although it cost as much as an airplane wing, he didn't regret a single peso. To him, his wife's happiness was priceless. "What is it, darling? Do you like what you see?" Valeria twirled on her toes, smiling as she noticed Carlos's gaze follow every movement of her slender figure. "I'm absolutely crazy about you," he said, pulling her close and starting to kiss her neck. "Stop it." Valeria playfully smacked his shoulders and jumped away. "What did I do wrong?" Carlos asked in confusion. "I'm just kissing the most amazing woman in the world, my wife of 5 whole months." "Mama will hear everything through the wall," Valeria hissed in horror. "And then we'll get a lecture about our behavior." Carlos just shrugged. He had no idea what to say. His mother had never given any indication that she was uncomfortable living next to the newlyweds. Valeria caught his look and, as if explaining something to a child, began. "Listen, she spent her whole life teaching at school. Of course she's going to scold us and remind us how to behave. So when she's around, we keep our hands at our sides." "Now that's a stretch," Carlos chuckled. "My mom has very modern views, if you must know. And it's not like we were doing anything scandalous. I was just hugging and kissing my wife. What's so bad about that?" Valeria said nothing but gave him a look that made him feel guilty. "Okay, don't be upset," Carlos said, moving behind her and resting his hands on her shoulders. "Let's wait until your mom goes out somewhere, then we can have some fun," Valeria offered with a grin. Carlos nodded, hugging her again, but quietly thought, "It's February, there's a snowstorm outside. Where exactly is my mom going to go?" Soon, Valeria's growing obsession with the idea that her mother-in-law could somehow hear their private life began to invade their intimacy. "Mama will hear us," she would protest, pushing Carlos away, even at night when he gently reached for her. "She's been asleep for ages," he replied, surprised. Valeria had never said such things before. "I know how she sleeps," she pouted. "Yesterday in the kitchen, she smiled at me so knowingly, I got the message. She was hinting that she hears everything and knows everything." Carlos had to suppress the urge to check his wife's forehead for a fever. "Valeria, what are you saying?" he tried to reason with her. "My mom just likes you. That's why she smiles." "What's wrong with that?" "Everything's wrong with that." Valeria suddenly pulled her hand from his and turned away. "We're living like we're in a prison camp, being watched every second. As if we don't and can't have a personal life. We're married, but we have to sneak kisses in the middle of the night, whisper everything just so your mom doesn't hear us. And forget about enjoying each other on the couch or in the shower or walking around the apartment in underwear. That's taboo. We're not even allowed to think about it. It's painful, Carlos. Valeria, I think you're overthinking this, Carlos whispered, though part of him wanted to shout. What are you imagining? I imagine, she said without turning around, that every young couple should live separately from the older generation. And it hurts me that my beloved husband doesn't understand that. But if we have enough space, and my mom hasn't done anything to hurt you, why should we move out? Carlos couldn't understand. If you were constantly fighting, I'd get it. But you get along so well. Sometimes I feel like she's more open with you than with me, her own son. And you think I like that openness? Valeria snapped. I come home from work and bam, an interrogation. So many questions, Carlos. About my day, what happened at work? Tell me, would you like it if someone demanded a report from you every single day? Carlos shook his head and sat up abruptly. Listen, honey, what are you even saying? I honestly don't get where this is all coming from. I've never seen my mom mistreat you. And now suddenly she's some kind of evil mastermind, like Cardinal Richelieu, plotting to make your life miserable? Care to explain? What do I not know? There it is, Valeria sobbed, covering her face. I knew your mom would turn you against me. Okay, this is too much, Carlos said firmly, jumping out of bed and pacing. Tell me what's going on clearly, and without the tears. Nothing's going on. Go ask your mom what's happening. All I know is I don't feel comfortable in this house. I don't, Carlos. It feels like your precious Maria Consuelo is just waiting for me to mess up. Carlos rubbed his chin and walked out, throwing on his robe. He had no idea what had just happened, but he realized he needed to talk to the other side too. A sliver of light glowed under his mother's door. He knocked gently and turned the handle. Mom, he began, Valeria says you're treating her, not badly, just off sometimes. Really? Maria Consuelo looked up from a Spanish novel she was reading. Then ask her for the heartbreaking details, please. I can assure you, Carlos, I've done nothing to offend your wife. I know, please don't be upset, Carlos waved his hands. Just try to understand me. I have to figure out what's going on with Valeria. You two used to get along so well, and now this. Now this, Maria Consuelo smiled. A mother-in-law who stays home too much can be exhausting for a young lady who wants to be queen of her own castle. So what am I supposed to do? Carlos shook his head. Son, the smart move is to sit down with Valeria and start planning how you'll get your own place. For now, it'll probably be a small one-bedroom, and your wife needs to be ready for that. You mean we'll need a mortgage? Carlos sighed, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe. I mean that the longer you live here, the more your wife will resent me, Maria Consuelo said lovingly. And I can't really help much financially. You know I have my modest teacher's pension and a little from your father's. I can't give you a down payment. No, Mom. Don't even think about that, Carlos waved his hands again. We'll manage it ourselves. Valeria and I both work. We'll figure it out. Go on, sweetheart. Go to sleep. You've got work tomorrow. Maria Consuelo stood up, hugged Carlos, and kissed his temple, just like she used to when he was a little boy. Tomorrow is a new day, she said. Let the dust settle. When Carlos returned to the bedroom, Valeria was pretending to sleep. But he knew perfectly well that under the blanket was a very upset young woman, quiet, but fuming. Over the next week, Carlos watched closely what his mother said, how she acted, and how his wife responded. Valeria remained polite, smart, and well-mannered, but it was increasingly clear, even the calmest remarks from her mother-in-law could easily offend her. Meanwhile, his mother was doing everything she possibly could to act properly. She never reproached her daughter-in-law and tried her best to avoid even crossing paths with her in the hallway or the kitchen. But this strategy didn't help, because not long after, Valeria presented Carlos with another complaint. "Your mother is so disgusted by me she hides in her room the moment I come home from work. Tell me, isn't that insulting? What did I do to deserve that?" "You know perfectly well she didn't mean to offend you," Carlos replied, growing tired of the constant battles at home. "She was just in her room, that's all. There's nothing secret or personal about it." "But when you come home from work, she always comes out to greet you," Valeria continued angrily. "First of all, that takes away my chance to greet my husband properly, and second, it separates us. When I come home, nothing. When you come in, it's fireworks." Carlos could feel the situation heating up, but he still couldn't figure out how to defuse it. And seeing her husband hesitate, Valeria came up with a new tactic to get her way. "Sweetheart, my period is late. I can't say for sure yet, but can you imagine what it would mean if I were pregnant?" "It would be a celebration," her husband replied confidently. "I want a baby. Remember, we said we'd have at least 3? Sounds like the perfect time to start. How can you not understand?" Valeria flared up. "I'd bring a newborn into this house, and your dear mother Maria Consuelo would be constantly interfering, telling me what to do with my child." "But why are you so sure she'll interfere?" Carlos asked, retreating under the force of her pressure. "Because mothers-in-law always decide how grandchildren should be raised, unless their sons act in time and deal with the housing situation. So what you're saying is, we must live separately," Carlos clarified. "I want you to be mine, and me to be yours, only ours," Valeria whispered, switching from fury to affection. She snuggled into him, rested her head on his chin, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I understand that a young wife wants to be the true queen of her home," Carlos murmured in her ear. "So let's consider a mortgage. I'm earning well, and you still have a job too. If we tighten our belts, we could get a small one-bedroom place. What do you think? We'll pay it off quickly and then upgrade." "Disgusting," Valeria snapped, eyes flashing with fury. The loving woman from moments ago had vanished. "How could you even suggest that? Crammed into a one-bedroom with a baby? No space, no privacy? And the child growing up with the idea that their parents have no money because they're paying off a mortgage with insane interest? Then what do you want from me?" Carlos, honestly, was tired of the endless, directionless arguments. But he loved Valeria deeply and wanted to understand how to reconcile. "Let's figure out a way to live comfortably now," she said, flicking her sculpted shoulder. "There are plenty of good options in the world." "Such as?" Carlos could tell she wanted to dodge the conversation, but he pressed on. Then Valeria offered him a list of suggestions, each more outrageous than the last. Carlos doubted any normal man would have come up with what she proposed. "Your mother could live in the countryside year-round, not just in summer," she said persuasively. "She loves it there, her garden, her greenhouse, her grapevine-covered arch out there, she thrives. Here, she withers, gets pale and moody. And country air is great for retirees. Plus," Valeria continued, ignoring Carlos's darkening expression, "your mom could even take out a mortgage for her own place. Sure, her income's small, but I'm convinced every pensioner has a nice stash under the mattress. She could use that for a big down payment. And you'd inherit that place later. It makes more sense for her to live in a one-bedroom than for us with a baby. My mother can't live in the countryside year-round, the house isn't built for that," Carlos cut her off. "And she can't take a mortgage, she gave all her savings to us for the wedding. I told you that. Even a small apartment in this neighborhood is out of reach for her. And I'll never make my mother live on the outskirts and take public transport to the clinic. I won't do that to her." "Oh, so you won't do that to your mother, but you'll do it to me?" Tears sprang to Valeria's eyes. "We're two young working adults. We wouldn't live on the outskirts, we'd get a small place downtown," Carlos said, his tone now colder, more resolute. But you're still suggesting that me and a newborn baby should squeeze into a one-bedroom while your mom lives it up in this giant apartment. Valeria yanked her hand away, ran to the closet, and began throwing on clothes. I'm not staying where I'm not valued or loved, and where my future child is already second to your selfish mother. Last I checked, we don't have a child yet, Carlos replied, fixing his wife with a hard, unblinking stare for the first time. And you're already making a tragedy out of nothing. A tragedy? Valeria whirled around one last time, then slammed the front door behind her. Maria Consuelo had been sitting in her room during the entire argument. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but the voices carried, and she became an unwilling witness. She knew how much her son was hurting. When she heard the door slam, she got up and quietly stepped into the hallway. Carlos was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall by the door. For a moment, she thought he might cry. But then he looked up at her. "Sorry we disturbed you," he said. "I hope this never happens again." "It will happen again, my son," Maria Consuelo said softly, motioning for him to come into the kitchen. They drank tea with sweet buns, just like in Carlos's childhood. Maria Consuelo cracked jokes and did everything she could to comfort him. "Valeria is a good girl. Every woman wants her own home," she said gently, but Carlos interrupted. "But my wife is going too far. You need to be gentle." "Don't provoke her," his mother advised. "Who knows? Maybe I have offended her unintentionally." "She's just being difficult," Carlos replied firmly. "In the end, she'll have to choose from the options I gave her. I'm not a billionaire. I can't snap my fingers and produce a 3-bedroom palace. She'll have to accept it." But Valeria was determined. She knew her husband loved her deeply, and she could wrap him around her finger. She hoped for a quick and favorable resolution. The idea of living in that big apartment with her mother-in-law was unbearable. Her own mother supported her fully. And it was that experienced woman who shared another brilliant idea with her daughter. "Strictly speaking," she told Valeria, "it would be much better if you and Carlitos bought something of your own. Anything can happen in life, and if you have to leave with just a suitcase after living half your life in his home, that's a terrible outcome." "Mom, come on," Valeria laughed. "Carlos loves me, and I love him. We'll be fine. As soon as we sort out the housing, we'll live like royalty. But I'm not going to sacrifice everything just to pay a mortgage." "That's the trap many women fall into," her mother replied calmly. "You must secure your stake in the property. Better you both buy a small 2-bedroom that's shared than push your mother-in-law to the countryside and end up staying in her 4-bedroom place. You'll see I'm right. I didn't raise you to come back to me with a suitcase. You don't have to go into debt. If Maria Consuelo moves to the country, sell the big apartment and buy a smaller one together. Then it'll be yours, not hers. You get it?" That wasn't Valeria's plan. In her ambitious dreams, she already knew where the boys' nursery would be, and the girls', and the playroom, and where she and Carlos would spend cozy evenings. She pictured herself doing interior design, running a lifestyle blog on social media. And now her mother was talking not just about getting rid of Maria Consuelo, but convincing Carlos to buy something. Still, the idea of having her own property was tempting. "I'll think about it, Mom." Valeria looked at the phone screen, where Carlos was once again trying to call her. And instead of rejecting the call, as she had already done several times, she finally answered. The couple made up, but Valeria made it clear that she would no longer tolerate what she called his disrespectful attitude toward her. She fully intended to see things through to the end. When Carlos asked how she was feeling, Valeria said her delay was over and then added in a sad voice, "You know, it could be that we lost the baby because of all the stress. Of course, I hadn't even confirmed it yet, but I feel it, Carlos. I just feel it. You understand, don't you?" Carlos was simply overjoyed that his wife had returned and they were together again. He was practically drowning in Valeria's eyes and would have torn out his own heart if it would have made her smile. He tried to distract her from the unpleasant thoughts and promised to think of ways to make her happy. You know exactly what would make me happy, Valeria said seriously, looking into his eyes. I want us to belong only to each other, to be alone, without anyone getting in the way. Valeria had a natural instinct for knowing when to push and when to hold back. She understood now was not the time to pressure Carlos further. So, she didn't create new conflicts or argue with Maria Consuelo, but she continued to subtly show her husband that things would be much better if they lived alone. Her mother's words, that they could sell the apartment and buy a new one together, a place that would belong to them both, stayed fresh in Valeria's mind. So she continued implementing her plan. Sometimes she would enter the bathroom while Carlos was shaving, wrap her arms around him tenderly, then suddenly push him away with a bitter look toward the door, as if to say, I want you, but your mother is here and will hear everything. Other times she'd hug him in the kitchen, then jump back the moment she heard Maria Consuelo's footsteps on the other side of the apartment, again giving Carlos a reproachful glance, as if to say, I give you my heart, but this house won't let me. And when Carlos brought up the idea of seriously trying for a baby, Valeria widened her eyes and said that no child should grow up in such a suffocating atmosphere. I never want to fight with you again, Carlitos, she'd say. But I know your mom won't stay out of our child's upbringing. Why fight? We can't afford a mortgage and still live freely. Since there's no other option for housing right now, we'll just have to wait. As the weather warmed up, Maria Consuelo began preparing to move to the countryside. She could see clearly that all was not well in her son's marriage, and she knew her presence was part of the issue. A quiet, modest woman, she would have left sooner if she could, but the cottage wasn't suitable for winter. Now that the spring sun had warmed the earth, she packed her bags and told Carlos he'd need to help her move that weekend. No problem, Mom, Carlos replied with a big smile. Let's go first thing Saturday morning and get it done. Even Valeria, who had recently been carefully neutral toward Maria Consuelo, not rude, but not warm, greeted her with a wide smile. She knew that once her mother-in-law left, she would have a much easier time pushing Carlos toward the decision she wanted. Maria Consuelo rushed to the store for a few last-minute items she'd need for the country season. Sure, she could have asked Carlitos to carry the bags, but she knew her daughter-in-law wouldn't appreciate that. Better to get everything herself. But fate intervened. On the steep steps outside the store, Maria Consuelo tripped and twisted her ankle. Before she could panic, a pair of strong hands caught her and gently helped her onto a bench. What's a lovely lady like you doing out here alone? The voice belonged to her rescuer and unexpected helper. Seeing that the man beside her was about her age, perhaps a bit older, Maria Consuelo smiled politely and explained she was just on her way to the store. Well, now you need a clinic, or better yet, an emergency care center. Did you come here by public transport? By what? She repeated, confused, but it didn't matter. Realizing she had walked, the man quickly pulled his car from the parking lot, helped her inside, and 15 minutes later, they were at the trauma center. And that was how she met Rafael. He turned out to be a retired emergency physician. Seeing someone in distress, he simply couldn't walk by. The two quickly became close, chatting often, discovering they had much in common, and liking each other more and more. Rafael was also a widower, his children were grown. And Maria Consuelo clearly caught his eye. Because the sprain was serious, she had to delay her trip to the cottage. Day and night, she now spent in her room, chatting with Rafael by video or phone. When he was busy, they messaged, just like teenagers. Maria Consuelo glowed. She looked younger, happier, even from bed, she looked to the future with optimism. Everyone loved this development, except Valeria. She had already mentally planned a grand farewell for her mother-in-law, picturing 6 glorious months alone with Carlos. Now, not only was Maria Consuelo still in the apartment, needing help with meals, dishes, even trips to the bathroom, but she had also found a boyfriend. At her age. Normal people over 60 wait for grandkids, Valeria snapped to Carlos. But look at her, chasing boyfriends. He's not her boyfriend, Carlos laughed. They just met and like talking. Let them. What's it to you? It is something to me. Valeria snapped back. Carlitos, this can't go on. We need to solve the housing issue. I'm ready to have a baby, but not here. You get that, don't you? That's when Valeria finally laid out her plan. Either they sold the big apartment and bought 2 smaller ones, or what was the point of being a family? Think about it. Your mom doesn't need a 4-bedroom place. She lives alone. Let her take a 1-bedroom. We'll get a 3-bedroom for us, and the 2 kids will have 1 day. Carlos opened his mouth to argue, but Valeria hit him with another pre-prepared blow. And remember, this Rafael guy is probably going to propose. These old guys? Total scammers. He'll marry her and then split the inheritance with you. You've already married her off and buried her? Carlos burst out laughing. But Valeria grabbed his hand and said seriously, I'm just saying, it's best to think ahead. But honey, Carlos stammered, you knew who you were marrying. And now you're pushing me so hard to buy a place, I don't even know what to call it. Yes, I knew, Valeria cut in. I married a wonderful guy who loves me and wants us to be happy. But right now, you're acting like the dog in the manger. You won't give up the apartment, and you won't make it ours either. Living off every peso just to pay a mortgage? That's not the life I agreed to. I didn't sign up to give birth in a pastor apartment where I already feel like a maid. So figure it out, Carlitos. If we're having a child, it will be in a real home. And if we're not a family but just some vague arrangement. What do you mean, we're not a family? Carlos flared up. Because in a real family, there are children. And until we have a proper home, I won't even think about having one, Valeria replied coldly, turning away. Though she never faced rejection from Carlos in anything else, she was dead serious about this. She would push him toward buying a home, or else. One way or another, she'd break him down. Quietly, so Valeria wouldn't hear, Carlos had already spoken to his mother a couple of weeks earlier. He gently brought up that it might be tough for her to maintain a 4-bedroom apartment on her pension, and suggested that if they split up the housing, it would ease the burden for everyone. They could avoid a heavy mortgage, and Maria Consuelo would have less stress too. But they hadn't reached a decision yet. Maria Consuelo was still unsure. So Carlos kept it to himself, for now. If his mother agreed, it would be a surprise. If not, he'd come up with something else fast. Maria Consuelo had heard the whole heated conversation. Valeria had made sure her shouting carried, perhaps intentionally. But she wasn't the only one who heard it. Rafael had just called on video chat and caught part of it too. Your daughter-in-law's pretty calculating, he remarked bluntly. Well, Valeria's actually not so bad, Maria Consuelo tried to defend her. But Rafael interrupted with a laugh. We, old schemers who love stealing other people's inheritance, think something fishy is going on here. Anything's possible, Rafalik, Maria Consuelo sighed heavily, and then, to her own surprise, added, Why don't you come over? We could have some tea, chat a little. Consider it done, Rafael smiled at the screen. He appeared at her door 40 minutes later, perfectly dressed, holding a box with a cake inside and a bottle of wine. For Maria Consuelo, whom her son helped out of her room, it felt like a real celebration. Valeria, however, took one look at the man, scoffed with contempt, and turned away sharply. She could sense that her soft-hearted mother-in-law could be pushed into decisions, but this half-gray stranger made her uneasy. Well, shall we have some tea? Carlos asked warmly. You can have tea if you like, I have things to do, Valeria snapped, flicking her shoulder and immediately started gathering her things. Where are you going, sweetheart? You didn't say you had plans. Carlos was about to follow her, but Rafael subtly grabbed the young man's wrist. Must be some very important womanly business, he said meaningfully, urgent and not to be delayed. How nice of you to decide in someone else's house what's urgent and what's not, Valeria muttered bitterly. She clearly understood what the guest actually meant. Still, it was too awkward to back down, so she yanked her jacket off the rack, grabbed her bag, and headed for the elevator. Meanwhile, Rafael and Maria Consuelo continued setting the table as if nothing had happened. Every time Carlos tried to leave to catch up with Valeria, Rafael found a reason to keep him, handing him plates, asking for glasses, keeping him occupied. Once everyone was seated and cake was served, Carlos finally asked what had been on his mind. "Why were you so insistent I not go after her? What errands does she even have? Mom, do you know something? Is there something you're both not telling me?" Rafael gave a thoughtful grunt, looked at Maria Consuelo, and gestured for her to stay silent. "Aren't you tired of pretending to be this clueless fool?" Rafael looked at Carlos sternly and, cutting off his protest, continued. "Your wife is playing you like a fiddle, and not just you. You're young, you can take it. But you're also letting her disrespect your mother. And that, at her age, is not easy to bear." "Maybe Valeria is right," Carlos murmured, staring at his hands. "She wants a proper home for our future child, comfort, stability." "Valeria wants your property to become joint property," Rafael said sharply. "So she has some security, so she won't get thrown out with just a suitcase." "And what's so wrong with that?" Carlos asked defensively. "Nothing, if you two take out a mortgage and pay for a new place together. But if you let her carve up your father's inheritance and give half to a social climber, then excuse me, that's disgraceful. And let's not forget your mother's stake in this." "Why do you care?" Carlos bristled. "My mother and I have talked about this before. She didn't say she was against it." "Well, now she is against it," Rafael said, once again signaling Maria Consuelo to stay quiet. "She doesn't want to end up in a shoebox. No one's kicking you out, live here peacefully. But if you want your own place, get a mortgage. From what I hear, you earn well, you can manage." Carlos sighed and shook his head. "Mom, what do you say?" he asked. "Valeria's not completely wrong. And this guy's barking orders like he owns the place. I didn't even ask his opinion." "Son," Maria Consuelo's voice was soft but firm. "Selling the apartment really is premature. Rafael's right. So no selling, then." Carlos lowered his head. "But you do understand that selling the whole thing makes more sense than half of it." "So that's how you talk now," Rafael said with open disdain. "You'll do anything for your wife?" "I'll do anything for myself," Carlos replied, barely holding back his frustration. "We want children. We want a real family. And I am a co-owner of this apartment. Not only will you not sell the whole place," Maria Consuelo's voice turned resolute as Rafael squeezed her hand, "but you won't sell your half either. This apartment is a memory of your late father. We can't bring him back, but please, don't do this, Carlitos." None of them realized that Valeria had returned and was eavesdropping at the door. She had remembered, just as she reached the elevator, that she was still in slippers. Quietly, she came back just in time to overhear Carlos arguing with his mother. Valeria had been sure she was close to getting what she wanted, that the apartment was practically in her pocket. She hadn't expected such resistance from soft-spoken Maria Consuelo. It was clear Rafael's influence had changed everything. Valeria didn't bring up the apartment again, not that day, not the next. She could feel the resistance now and didn't want to fight her husband just yet. She waited, hoping Maria Consuelo would recover and finally leave for the countryside. Maybe then she and Carlos could revisit the topic. But Carlos stayed silent. That kitchen conversation had clarified many things for him. He was ready to start fresh with his young wife, but only if she stopped making demands. And as Rafael rightly pointed out during a later visit, Valeria's parents weren't offering up their own property for her sake. That said a lot. Valeria didn't return to the topic until midsummer, when she faced a harsh surprise. This time, her delay was real. The ambitious young woman had never planned to tie herself down with a child. When she talked about being ready, it had been a tactic. A lure. Now, Valeria realized that she'd have to seriously consider the living situation. "Darling, what are we going to do?" she asked when the test showed 2 bold lines. Carlos noticed how sad she looked. He didn't understand why a married woman would react to pregnancy this way. "We're going to welcome this baby with joy," he said, pulling her into a hug. "If only you knew how much I love you, how much I've wanted this." "That's not what I meant." Valeria pulled away and took a few steps back. "I told you I don't want to raise a baby in this borderline communal apartment. We talked about this. You never found a solution. You're the head of this family." "All I can offer is a mortgage," Carlos said gently. "I don't have money to buy a home outright. But we can manage it, together. The money is right here." Valeria spun around, gesturing dramatically. "You hoard everything. Why do we need this massive apartment if we're going to be buried under a mortgage for 20 years? Did you even ask me?" "I'm not selling the apartment, or my half of it," Carlos muttered. "I can't." "But you can do this to me?" Valeria shrieked. "I trusted you. I thought we'd always be together." "We will be together," Carlos said, trying to pull her close. "Now we'll have a child, more reason than ever to work hard. We'll make it." "No, we won't." Valeria realized the conversation was slipping out of her control. "This isn't motivation, it's deprivation. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not going to count pesos while your mother lives in luxury. She can manage without things, but my baby won't. I won't. My salary is more than enough. We won't be counting pesos," Carlos tried to argue. But Valeria shoved him out the door and slammed it shut. "I wasn't born to beg with a child in my arms," she shouted through the door. "Kids are for men who provide for them, not for ones like you, who can't cut the cord from their mommies." Carlos had a lot to think about. That night, they slept apart for the first time, because Valeria didn't let him into the bedroom. She realized that this unexpected pregnancy had actually weakened her control over Carlos. "I need to live in comfort. I know my worth, Carlos," she said when he refused to sell his share of the apartment. Later, Carlos visited Maria Consuelo alone. Rafael was there too, but it was clear the young man was deeply troubled. "Don't pressure him," Rafael said, hugging Maria Consuelo. "He'll come around. But with a woman like her, it's no surprise he's struggling." Maria Consuelo nodded and started making her son's favorite dish. At least something would bring him comfort. Meanwhile, Valeria vented to Patricia. "I just didn't think he was such a disgusting creature. Got me pregnant, and then decided to grow a spine. He won't sell his share so we can buy a place, and he thinks getting a mortgage makes him smart. What if he stops earning? Am I supposed to beg him for pads? His mummy gets to live in comfort, but me and my child don't. And what's the point of marriage if I get nothing from it? What about the baby?" Patricia asked, startled. "The baby didn't ask for any of this." "There is no baby," Valeria replied with a smug smile. "I had it terminated. I sent Carlos the paperwork. Let him see what he's driven me to. No worries, I'm leaving this pathetic family in time. I'm young, healthy, beautiful. I'll find a generous man and have kids with a real alpha, not a spineless pushover like Carlos." Deep down, Patricia felt relieved for Carlos. Because honestly, being married to someone like Valeria required a whole different skill set. And it seemed Carlos had figured things out just in time, before the noose had fully tightened. Somewhere far away, in his mother's country house, Carlos looked up at the stars and dreamed that one day, he'd have a real family. And this time, he wouldn't be fooled by fake charm or beauty. Next time, he'd choose based on character.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.